Hiya, it's just Josh here this time. I'm going to be doing a solo video today. I kind of intend to do more solo videos over the course of the channel rather than strictly just doing Neat Freaks with Jack. I kind of want to do some videos that are a bit more focused on really specific topics that kind of interest me only, that maybe I can't necessarily talk about in depth with Jack. This video in particular is kind of meant to serve as a bookend to the last episode of the podcast. Obviously, me and Jack were discussing Muso games in kind of extreme depth. Obviously, we also said that I had the most experience out of the two, and to be honest, Fate Extella is a game that I've been playing so much recently, and I think that that really was what kind of sparked the idea to talk about Muso games in the first place, because I really did have quite a lot to say about Fate Extella, and I did say quite a bit about it in the video, but I kind of felt that there are things outside of just discussing it as like a kind of Muso game entry that I kind of wanted to get across, mainly how it kind of fits into the Fate franchise and kind of just how I feel about it. And I also wanted to kind of compound that by maybe discussing how other Fate fans should view it who are on the fence, and also people that haven't even played Fate or seen any Fate kind of media before, who maybe are curious about if this game is like for them or if it's a good entryway into the series. This video is going to function as a light review of Fate Extella as well as my thoughts on it, so I should probably begin by talking about the gameplay. Fate Extella is obviously structured like a Dynasty Warriors game. In a general round, the main goal of the game is land acquisition via killing heavy amounts of NPCs. Usually they're small grunts, and then they lead on to summoning larger grunts, which then usually wins you the space. Every kind of level is segmented into almost specific little arenas. Sometimes each arena kind of has a gimmick to it, such as a trap that you need a special spell to nullify. Sometimes it will lock you in and won't let you out until you've destroyed everything. Or sometimes it just summons an enemy servant directly in that you need to fight to get out. Generally, the way that you achieve a win state is to take as much land as possible, and the way that you often achieve a fail state is to lose all of the land that you have. The gameplay is very similar to Dynasty Warriors in that the general combat is light attacks that lead into heavy attacks. Usually if your combo string is a certain amount of button pushes to a triangle button push, then it will result in a different attack animation. Sometimes they have different effects, such as being a launcher or something of that degree that will change the situation of the fight and might lead you to do more combos effectively. There's also a command dash by pressing R1. It's a very effective dash that actually vacuums enemies in close to you briefly, so you're able to travel with the enemies and continue a combo even while travelling, which is very effective. And of course the biggest feature is probably the Extella gauge, in which you dash forward into an enemy and initiate a small quick time event sequence, in which you can rack up a large combo and usually clear the screen of many enemies. They're very effective tools to use in the game, and they definitely add a lot to the formula of a Dynasty Warriors game, I think. The other feature as well is certain unique characters have particular mechanics that are only unique to them. Examples of which are characters like Li Xuan and Archer that have unique bars beneath their health bar that you activate by blocking and pressing triangle. They give you various effects that aren't usually found. For example, Archer's blades are longer, and Li Xuan's ki energy is channeled, which apparently makes him much stronger physically. And I guess the final thing to mention is the Noble Phantasm circuits, which I talked about quite a bit in the podcast. But they're effectively 3 collectibles that you need to find in the stage that initiates your Noble Phantasm. A big screen clearing cutscene basically. But they are able to make it so they can't be abused and scummed per level. You only ever get one opportunity to use it in the entire mission. I do have some criticisms with Fate Extella, and they aren't all necessarily because of it being a Muso game. One of the biggest issues is that from the beginning of the game, no characters are unlocked for the free play mode. You basically unlock every single one of them via playing all 4 story campaigns, which easily is probably over 20 hours to do all 4 of them consecutively. and that was just a bit of a pain in the arse. In a lot of Warriors games, usually a small amount of characters are unlocked from the beginning, and then you unlock more as you go. I would have expected at least Nero's team to maybe be unlocked right from the beginning, but that wasn't the case, unfortunately. So free playing with characters has been a bit hard, and I haven't really had enough time to experience all the characters, and I have racked up quite a lot of gameplay time with it. Another problem is that the camera is quite problematic in a lot of instances. You can only ever lock on to an enemy servant. You can't lock on to a larger grunt character, for example, and that makes some fights and just manually moving the camera around a bit of a pain in the arse, to be honest. I guess if there was one more complaint I'd have to say is that you sometimes aren't necessarily sure of status ailments that you might get within a level. Several enemies usually can inflict different status ailments, such as stunning or freezing or poison, just to name a few, and you can counteract those with the right cure. However, unfortunately, you need to have selected it before playing, and there aren't many codecasts to my knowledge that have an all-encompassing healing and status effect remedying loadout. Overall, Fate Extella is a game that I still continue to have quite a lot of fun with even now. It's definitely not a perfect game, but I think overall it's got quite a lot going for it. It has some very fluid and responsive gameplay that I find quite enjoyable. It's got a reasonable amount of mechanical depth that gives me a lot of incentive to replay it. It also has quite a good consistent frame rate. There haven't been any stuttering issues I've noticed on the PS4 version. I haven't played the Vita version yet, but I do intend to in the future. And of course, it just gets quite a lot of Fate fan service right. There's a lot in there that as a Fate fan I can appreciate and enjoy. It isn't completely perfect, however. As I said, there are some issues with the camera. I feel that the rate at which you unlock new servants to play is a bit slow, and just really personal gripes with the healing and loadout system. But honestly, beyond that, it's a very good game overall, and I don't really like to give number ratings, but if I did, I'd probably give it a very strong 8.5 out of 10 on a gameplay level. However, I want to move away from the review part of the video and just talk about general thoughts about it so I can go a bit deeper into it. I think it would be pertinent for me to firstly discuss how Fate can actually be systemised into a game format, because I think there's a few ways that you could look at it. I think we should begin by talking about the key ritual in the Fate series, which is the Holy Grail War. It's quite an important part of it. It basically involves 7 masters who are effectively humans capable of magecraft, so they still kind of are effectively humans but with minor magical powers, and they summon 7 servants who are basically superhuman in most regards. In fact, they are so powerful they eventually become a unit of measurement to measure the power level of actual gods in the universe. In the original Fate Stay Night, the Holy Grail War was portrayed as more of just a traditional Battle Royale style all-out deathmatch, everyone just out to kill everyone else. Of course there were usually teammates forged and alliances that were temporary, but it ultimately was meant to be a single man standing. In Fate Extra, it was portrayed more as a massive tournament with about over 200 masters and servants, I believe. And in something like Fate Apocrypha, it was more of a large-scale war of 2 different factions, of each with 7 servants and masters. So there have been a few different ways that the Holy Grail War has actually been brought into separate Fate media. It's interesting to note that the most common genre of video games that Fate has actually shown up in has been fighting games. There have been 2 of them so far. There was Fate Tiger Colosseum on the PSP. It was a little cute chibi fighter, but it still was a fighting game and a Fate game. And then there was the kind of more serious Fate Unlimited Codes on the PS2 and PSP, and I believe it started life in arcades. And other than that, there is only really Fate Extra on the PSP. While servants fighting it out is considered a pretty important part of Fate, I actually believe that another integral part is the interplay of the masters. I think that their plotting and scheming and strategies are usually an important part of what makes up a Holy Grail War, and in a fighting game that part doesn't really show through as much. I mean, in Fate Unlimited Codes, luckily they make some of the characters playable, such as Rin and Shiro. I can't speak for Tiger Colosseum. However, in Fate Extra, you're actually playing as a master who's directing their servant, rather than taking direct control of a servant. So I think in that regard it actually adds a bit more of the nuanced layer of Fate Stay Night that I was getting at before. There's also a bigger focus on the masters and having their kind of communication and their kind of scheming. So I think that Fate Extra probably is a more faithful adaptation of the Fate Stay Night feel, if you understand what I'm getting at. Of course, the gameplay of Fate Extella is a bit different from anything that I would expect from Fate media usually, as you're fighting hordes of random grunts and then occasionally fighting a servant, perhaps. There also isn't really much interplay between different masters. There is technically 3 masters in the game, although they're all facets of the same master's personality. It's strange in the way that it follows on from Fate Extra. It disregards the fact that there were multiple routes in Fate Extra, such as being able to use Saber, Caster and Archer. While the Nero and Tamamo kind of stories are acknowledged, they completely disregard that there was even an Archer route in it. And basically every master that was even in the game doesn't show up again, and granted, some of them do die, so I guess that's kind of forgivable. But there really isn't any acknowledgement of there being any masters at all in it. I mean, Fate Extra had many different masters, including pulling some out from Fate Stay Night, such as Rin and Shinji, and just having some original characters too, so in that regard Extella was a bit of a misstep in my opinion. However, that's not to say that the narrative isn't strong in Fate Extella, quite the opposite. I believe it's very strong. There's a large amount of quite complex exposition about the inner workings of the world, which is very Nazu-esque. The kind of world-hopping time-travelling story, very evocative of Steins Gate, which anything that does that isn't really bad in my opinion. I think there was a very strong emotional core in the story. I think you could really believe the romance between the protagonist and the servants. And the fact that if you used the female master, there was still the romance element. They didn't like cheap out with it, which I think was good. And I think the fact that Altera ended up being a much more strong emotional character than I kind of expected was a good turn to throw me through. So overall I think that the story was still quite strong, and it definitely is a good entry in the Fate universe. So overall, I have to ask, could non-Fate fans get into Fate through this game? While it is a Muso game at heart, so it is accessible and quite easy to play and understand, the story is a bit too dense, and there's quite a reliance on you playing Fate Extra, and it's also not a mainline universe entry, so you won't be able to really springboard off of Fate Extella into the main universe. And because of that, consequently, it won't explain much about how the main universe works. But what about if you are a Fate fan? Well, of course, there are fan favourite Fate characters, such as Arturia, Ryder from Fate Zero, basically a couple of the characters from Fate Stay Night, there's Joan of Arc from Apocrypha. While I do think that they had a bit of a misstep not playing with Shielder or Arcuid from Tsukihime or Shiki Ryogi from Karanoki Okai, they overall got a good roster. The story definitely displays the strengths of Nazu's storytelling, as I mentioned earlier. Also, just to draw a brief comparison, Arc Systems developed the game Persona 4 Arena quite accessibly, so fans of Persona 4 the RPG could play it if they didn't have much experience. In a similar way, if you're a fan of the Fate universe but don't necessarily play many video games, then the simplicity of this could probably be quite good for you. And I think that that will do me. Thank you for listening, and I hope that this video had maybe helped you decide whether or not Fate Extella is a game for you. And I'll see you all in the next one. See you later.